There must be a strict supervision of all banking and credit and investment. There must be an end to speculation with other people's money.
If you recall from the last video, conservatism is a response to the New Deal. The New Deal is a response to the Great Depression. The social system that the New Deal laid a foundation for is diametrically opposed to the government Buckley wanted. In the conscience of a conservative, the argument against the New Deal is not against the good that the programs bring to society, but that the federal government should not be the mechanism by which these systems are implemented. This is the lens through which we should view any argument conservatism makes against a, quote, welfare state. The Great Depression was a combination of high unemployment with a total collapse of the banking system, all of this precipitated by the stock market crash in 1929. Franklin Delano Roosevelt used a set of social programs to help support Americans decimated by the Great Depression. FDR started these programs immediately after his inauguration in March of 1933, which followed his victory over Herbert Hoover. These programs were famously called the New Deal. FDR's New Deal contrasted the conservative approach that Herbert Hoover used, which can be summed up by him saying, "The Depression will run its course." That is a laissez-faire, French for let them do, approach to economics. It is also the foundation of what Buckley wanted. If you remember from their last video, he said it is the job of centralized government in peacetime to protect its citizens' lives, liberty, and property. All other activities of government tend to diminish freedom and hamper progress. Before we continue on looking into the New Deal and the Great Depression, don't forget to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. So what was the Great Depression? It lasted from 1929 to 1939, a full decade, and it was precipitated by the stock market crashing in 1929. However, it wouldn't actually reach its height until 1933, when 15 million people were left unemployed and nearly half of the United States banks had closed. Let's pause for a moment to discuss the importance of banks to the American economy. Banks provide business loans, housing loans, investment portfolios. They invest in businesses and real estate. They even were investing in the stock market. Banks are the drivers of the American economy. Without them, the bus may go on for a few feet before it crashes. This is why economic stimulus almost always tilts towards banks. Our economy is heavily dependent upon the banking industry, even to this day. A big part of what led to the economic crash after the stock market took its tumble were actually bank runs. The lack of optimism in the economy led people to take out their savings from these banks. Without money in the banks, they weren't able to provide capital to businesses and people seeking to buy real estate. They also weren't able to turn around and put it in the stock market or invest in other opportunities. As the banks collapsed, so did the businesses. Of note, the banks had also invested in the stock market using their customers' money without consent. When the stock market crashed, this wiped out a large portion of the capital that banks had that they had taken from their customers. This is a big reason why 50% of the banks could no longer operate by 1933. They had gambled with their customers' money and everyone lost. It was lack of regulation that led to the stock market crash. As investors abused the system to maximize their income, there was no requirement for a business to provide any financial details of their company. If you were invested in that company, you were taking it. You literally were gambling. You might as well have gone to the roulette table and played roulette. This lack of regulation was a laissez-faire approach to economics. Herbert Hoover was a big proponent of this economic approach. And by using this laid back, don't do it, let the markets recorrect themselves approach, he contributed to $6 billion of debt. In today's dollar, that's $100 billion. Herbert Hoover's approach to the stock market crash turned a recession into the Great Depression. So 1932 rolls around, it's an election year. 3 years into the stock market crash, a recession is well underway and a depression is starting to form. The American economy needed someone to restore faith in the future and confidence in the dollar. They turned to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR is one of the most important presidents in American history, but we don't have time to deal with all that other stuff. We're just going to focus on the New Deal, which was a series of social programs, regulations, and stimulus that FDR instituted from 1933 to 1939. The most famous among these were Social Security and unemployment, but it was much more vast than just those famous programs that everyone today recognizes. And we're going to focus just on banks and creating jobs, which allowed a struggling economy to begin to build confidence back in the U.S. dollar. It certainly wasn't easy sailing for America during this time. From FDR's inauguration, it took 6 years to really get out of the Depression. Things got complicated by the Dust Bowl. Things got complicated when the United Auto Workers went on strike in Flint, Michigan. On March 4th of 1933, FDR is inaugurated, and the entire nation waits on bated breath to see what his first actions as president are going to be to help return confidence in the American economy. 2 days later, on March 6th, those directions begin with an executive order proclaiming a bank holiday. Then 3 days later, on March 9th, Congress passed the Emergency Banking Act. Part of this act, FDR used to encourage the Federal Reserve to create a deposit insurance of 100%. On March 12th, FDR held a fireside chat and explained this process of insuring their savings inside these banks to the American people. On March 14th, when the banks were set to reopen after this long holiday, people were lined up to deposit their cash back into the banks. These were the actions that the American people were looking for to give them guidance and help restore confidence in the American dollar, in the banks, and even in the stock market. Building confidence in the banks would prove to be much easier than rebuilding the businesses and returning the lost jobs. Americans had taken out their savings because of a valid fear they'd lose their money. But with an entire economy collapsing, there was no place for them to spend their savings. And even with confidence in these banks restored, there was still no place for them to spend their savings. And so businesses were not recovering. And as they collapsed, Americans would need to turn to their savings to survive. To combat this, FDR focused on the creation of jobs. The Works Progress Administration, along with other newly formed government agencies, were responsible for the creation of 2.5 million public works jobs in those 6 years from 1933 to 1939. Hospitals, schools, highways, airports, playgrounds, theaters, docks, you name it, and they were building it. Amazingly, FDR even regulated these jobs. Yes, he regulated the federal government so that they did not outcompete the private sector. As I said earlier, the New Deal is much more vast than we have covered, but I really wanted to focus on two aspects of it that were pivotal to recovery and were social programs. A laissez-faire or conservative approach would not have instituted these measures and would have let Americans suffer while the markets slowly corrected, if they ever corrected. Essentially, the conservative economist would have told the profusely bleeding patient, survival of the fittest. I really think that FDR's inauguration speech gives us a great look into his mind and what he viewed was necessary to rebuild his confidence in the economy and help prevent something like the Great Depression from happening again. And he said this about banks: there must be strict supervision of all banking and credits and investments so that there will be an end to speculation with other people's money. FDR, who had spent time in Wall Street, was effectively saying, without direction, without regulations, Without government interference or action, this will continue to happen and there will be no confidence in the economy. So FDR was telling the American people that he is going to come out and he is going to create new laws and new programs that help avoid what happened in 1929 in the future. Now, there's a great American myth that World War II ended the Great Depression. It definitely helped speed up the final period of recovery, but it was FDR's continued actions to recover the banking sector and jobs, along with the new regulations of the stock market and banking industry, that were most important in recovering from the Great Depression. Without the New Deal, it would have taken the entirety of World War II to fully recover, and I'm not convinced that we actually would have. Let's wrap this up. In a nutshell, lack of regulation led to the stock market crash of 1929. A laissez-faire approach led to the Great Depression. And FDR used social programs to stimulate the economy and pull America out of the Great Depression. These social programs that FDR imposed were the first serious attempt in America at socialism, and it was very American in its approach. Punitive action for greediness and the creation of opportunity for those that had theirs taken away. This was America's first step into collectivism. There is a very clear contrast to the effectiveness of conservative economics and collectivist economics. The Great Depression and the housing market crash of 2008 should have been enough to teach us this. However, we're still having an argument over the invisible hand principle and free market capitalism. Free market capitalism has led to the Great Depression and it led to the Great Recession. The only reason that the Great Recession didn't turn into the Great Depression was because we had regulations from 1933 that FDR put in place. Conservative economics do not work on a large scale, or conservative economics are missing a key proponent to what makes them work. However, we're out of time for today. So we'll return to this topic in a later episode. I thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. And always give this video a like. Until next time.